Welcome everybody. So we are about to start our session number 39, which is about economic development, growth, and analysis of poverty. Well, my name is Emanuele Ferrari. I'm working at the GSC of the European Commission, and Rimi is our host from the GTAP Center today. So I think we can somehow spare the etiquette because I guess you are all very aware of how to deal with the virtual conference. This is already the last day of the conference, and maybe so without any further ado, I can pass to introduce my first presenter. So just to let you know, if you have questions, you can either put in the chat, raise your hand, and then I will pass you the word, and you will be able to introduce yourself and raise your question, right? So in the meanwhile, if Christian, you want to start sharing your screen, I'll introduce yourself. So the first presentation will be about electric battery manufacturing, a game changer for the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we will hear from Christian Otchia, who is associate professor at the Nagoya University. And well, I guess, you have the usual 20 minutes. So Rimi will, when you are about to finish, 2 minutes left, we will give you a sign. The words is yours. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Emanuele, for the introduction. And thank you guys for this very nice conference. It has been a very good learning opportunity for me as well. So today I want to discuss a very ongoing research, but it's at a very early stage of the research. So I'll be very appreciative for your comments and suggestions to basically help me improve this research. So I'm going to work about electric battery manufacturing in DRC. And so if you want to understand probably some background information, and I think the discussion on electric vehicle is becoming very, very important in Africa, especially during this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, where African countries want to promote domestic value chain and basically processing most of the manufacturing at the sub-region. So basically develop what you call regional value chain. And there is a huge demand for electric vehicle, which basically represents an opportunity of 7 trillion, between today and 2030. And that's going to be 46 trillions between today and 2050. So this is a huge demand of vehicles. And for Africa, actually, you can see that many African countries that just started importing electric vehicle, but if you look at Asian countries like Indonesia or India, the usage of those 2- and 3-wheelers vehicles is really very popular, and it's also very increasing in Africa. So therefore, there is a big opportunity for African countries to step in, not only as a consumer, but also as a producer of certain parts of this electric vehicle value chain. And the annual lithium battery demand is growing very fast. And there is an opportunity, again, for African countries. We have cobalt and lithium that can be processed further to produce the battery. And there is a very nice study by Bloomberg, which basically wanted to study the opportunity of producing this electric vehicle, especially the battery, comparing the United States, China, Poland, and DRC. And the finding is very interesting. So what they show is that for DRC, it has a great potential to produce those electric battery and become a regional and global center of gravity for the production of this battery, for the simple reason that DRC has a huge endowment of natural resources. And the other reason, of course, is its position within Africa, bordering 7 countries, plus also Zambia, which has basically tremendous mineral resources, which could be combined with DRC and South Africa and also Madagascar to create a regional value chain. So there is an ongoing discussion, especially between the government of DRC and the government of Zambia, to work together under this copper belt resources to develop and process the cobalt and of course use South Africa as a processing zone. So the idea is basically that DRC could produce electric battery, and South Africa will basically develop the electric vehicle. So this is the idea behind this kind of study, which very interested me because it's a new sector which does not exist in DRC. So the question is, from the modeling perspective, how do you deal with this issue? And for the aim of this paper, of course, is to assess the impact of developing an electric battery industry on the Congolese economy, and more importantly, understand the possible complementary policy to help the country accelerate structural transformation using the forces of globalization. So basically, how do you use this continental free trade agreement, and how do you use regional value chain to develop a local industry? So it's not only that you need industrial policy within a country, but you need to coordinate your industrial policy with trade and other complementary policies. So as a study, I think it's very general, and the first step starts with the modeling. So I wanted to develop a special or a regional social accounting matrix for DRC using a very disaggregated mining sectors, because most of the study, especially for the regions, uses aggregate mining sector. And of course, we can learn more by disaggregating the mining sector, but also by disaggregating the regions, because we have a huge spatial heterogeneity in the endowment of natural resources. And I will show you basically what I mean by that. And of course, the second objective is to be able to model the development of this new industry using a CGE model, and introduce some special features for the electric battery production and energy consumption. So this is a very big project and very ambitious, but it's at very early stage of the development. So I really appreciate your comment and suggestions. So let me jump into the methodology. So I'm planning to use the standard single country dynamic CGE model designed by IFPRI, and basically use the SAM, the regionalized SAM for DRC, which has 19 sectors. For the time being, I have only mining sector, but I'm planning to disaggregate into very important minerals moving forward. And the SAM has 11 regions. So these 11 regions are basically following the administration category of DRC until 2015, because from 2016, DRC has now 26 regions or provinces, but I'm using the old aggregation because we don't have actually disaggregated data for the 26 provinces. So I'm gonna focus on the 11 provinces. And I have three factors of productions. I have capital, which I combine with land, and skill, and also unskilled labor. And I have regional households. So for each regions, they have a household and they have a firm. And I have one single government, one single transaction cost. And I'm also having a home consume output. So basically, as this is very relevant for agriculture, and I've done some past study focusing on home consume output. So I thought probably it could be a good feature of the SAM to have it also in here. Now, one probably, important remark is that I disaggregated only the activities by regions, but the commodity are aggregated at the national level. And so just to give you some of the insights about the structure of DRC's economy, I plot the structure using those forward and backward linkages. And I'm very interested in the mining sector, because this is one of the main sector for the study. But what we see, and I think this could be a very common feature in many Africans, especially natural resource-based economy, is usually you have small linkages within the economy. So this is probably the first message that we could see from this graph, is that the epic of the bars are very low for most of the sectors, meaning that there are very small linkages. And sector with high linkages is basically the food processing sector and agricultural sector, as well as transportation sector. So basically, DRC's economy, even if not mining play a key role for exports and government revenue, but it has no linkage with the domestic economy. So developing those electric battery industry will basically help DRC create domestic linkages with the rest of the economy and the rest of the provinces, and also be able to reduce poverty at the same time as promoting industrialization and also structural change. And we can see this is very striking. So I just plot the traditional key sector analysis. And as consistent with the previous graph, we can see that among the key sectors, there is agriculture, processed food, transportation, and also trade. So basically, which telling us that DRC strength is developing the agricultural value chain, because if you have agriculture, you have processed food and trade and transportation. This gives you basically agricultural value chain. So for a policy perspective, someone could say, let's promote agricultural value chain because it's the sector where DRC has, key strength in terms of the linkages. And if you look at the mining sector, it's basically a weakly oriented sector. Now, and this is probably traditionally accepted because most of the natural resources are exported to foreign countries without domestic processing. So meaning that mining sector has no linkages with the domestic economy. And I use the Hirschman linkages, even the weights linkage, give us basically the same story that DRC has. Mining sector has low linkages. So from the policy perspective, basically what is interesting could be probably to move the mining sector from a weakly oriented sector to a key sector. And one way could be by adding more value and linkages with the domestic economy. So this is one of the key objective of this paper. And this is also a distribution of factor from the SAM. And here I want to focus on the regional distribution. And what we see here is that for the capital, I just focus on the mining sector to show you basically how it looks like the heterogeneity in the distribution of natural resources. And the case of DRC, we know that most of the minerals are located in the Katanga province, the old Katanga provinces, and some of the Kasai provinces. So it's basically south east of part of the DRC, which has a lot of natural resources, and other regions have basically low endowment. So if you develop the mining sector, most of the outcome will be probably located here. And the capital is where we have no data because there is no processing, there is no mining extraction in the capital city. So there is basically no capital. And of course, in terms of labor, we see that the capital city and Katanga are the regions where you have a huge endowment of both skill and skilled labor. So this comes probably why the regional dimension is very important, because we can see from the graph that the mining industry is located in one provinces only, and therefore developing that province could also create linkages not only by sector but also by provinces with other provinces. So I think that is why I thought to focus with the regional analysis. And what is my strategy to implement the simulation? So I came across with a study from the Japan Energy Economic Research Institute done in 2006, where they estimated the input coefficient of gasoline and battery-based electric vehicle in the economy. And I'm still trying to understand the process of estimating this input coefficient, but I thought that we can also use those because there is no electric battery industry in the DRC. So one way could be to use others' data to estimate the potential input coefficient for the sector and just shove them in the model. So this is the approach I'm planning to use for the study. And I just want to follow the study done by the Japan Energy Economic Research Institute. So, but for the time being, I have not been able to gather all the data to estimate the input coefficient. So I just try to mimic using the changes from these input coefficients to estimate in the DRC model. So if I just shock the input coefficient from the IFRI model, we also find that there are huge heterogeneity in the impact. So this is just a distribution of GDP. And because there is not much linkages within the economy, so what I see is that if I mimic the change from this input coefficient from a Japan study, we see that most of the impact of developing this industry will remain in the Katanga provinces, because of course there is no much linkages with other sector, but there is not so much linkages with other regions. And the other area which benefit most from this impact is, of course, the Kasai regions, because they have also this in the center, because they have also huge endowment in natural resources. So some of the resources will be demanded from this sector. And in addition to this, there is the west part of DRC, where there is Kinshasa, the capital city, which is basically a financial an administrative center of the country. And if you go back to this graph, you will see there is no basically capital because there is no extraction industry, but in terms of impact, they also benefit a lot because of the administrative and the location of the main institutions. So you have a center basically which taking advantage of this mining development in the Katanga. But if you see the neighboring regions, like in the north, many of them don't really benefit much from this industry. So the policy discussion here could be, how do you create linkages, either by improving domestic supply of other resources or developing domestic clusters. And of course, the region at the west, which is the Congo Central now, benefits a lot because they produce electricity. So basically, I think they're linked with the Katanga regions because they supply electricity from these regions to the Katanga region. So this is how you can get some positive impact for the study. So I think the study is at a very embryonic stage. So what I want to do moving forward is to gather data. So probably look at the literature to understand how to estimate the demand for input coefficient, probably using China, for example, which has a huge industry of electric battery, and then see how I can mimic those changes within DRC. And of course, given the potential impact will be mainly limited to the regions which are endowed with natural resources, try to understand what could be other potential policy to help to engineer structural change and regional convergence in income between regions. So this is the end of my presentation, and I look forward to your comment and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think it was also very, very timely. There are already a few comments in the chat. I can either read it for you, or if the Roberto and Victor wants to show themselves and as they wish. Or I don't know whether you have access to the chat, Christian, yourself. Roberto, yes. Okay, please, Roberto, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I put on the chat a couple of comments. First of all, I will not be obsessed by the linkages. I also found that the labeling the linkages somehow misleading. Somehow I am teaching myself this at the university, but the thing that it will be very important to stay in the key quadrants don't simply means that you are a big seller and a big buyer in terms of domestic economy, but doesn't mean that this is not that you are more important or less important. It basically, and if I see mining has a very low forward linkages because basically it sells almost everything abroad, but quite a decent backward linkages. So it means that if there is a boom in exports of mining products like cobalt, that would first create a first order effect on the GDP, but also because of the decent backward linkages multiplier, it could also carry over to other sector. And then I have also a second comment which seems to me relevant because there is a literature on the resources course. As a matter of fact, in the world, the countries which are very abundant in natural resources are also sometimes the poorest and also the more unequal in terms of income and wealth distribution, affected by several problems like corruption. And so you have clear examples in Africa, but also I know very well, for example, the case of Bolivia. And here, of course, I don't know, CGs are neoclassical framework based on perfect competition, and here it's mainly about a massive market failure, which, okay, I see it difficult to capture in CG. So I am a CGE modeler, okay, so I'm very sympathetic to CGE, but in this case, I would say, well, you need a special tailored CGE model, but also coupled with other tools that may better capture these elements, which I don't know, maybe could also include elements of political economy or something like that.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I really appreciate your comment and suggestion. I totally agree that we definitely have to include a lot of aspects on the political economy, because especially for the case of DRC, it's very known, this unequal distribution of rent and corruption. And of course, one way could be, of course, to understand, and I think probably Victor also mentioned this comment about the factor ownership, because what also happened is the distribution of rent is that most of the investors, especially in terms of capital, is basically owned by foreigners. So, if we try to work in that direction, because many African countries, including DRC, they have actually upgraded their mining code to basically ask for more domestic reinvestment of the rents coming from natural resources. So, of course, modeling corruption and could be very difficult, as you mentioned, but probably from the policy discussion, I can also see how I can learn from this other change. But I thank also for your comment on the key sector. Of course, usually what I worry a lot is that if you link your comment on corruption, is basically that the lack of linkages with the rest of the economy makes mining a sector that is very vulnerable to shocks, but also that is not pro-poor in terms of economic development. So one way to make it pro-poor, usually I think we should try to increase, of course, even not only domestic linkage, but regional linkages. Of course, this brings also the discussion of having a more comprehensive analysis, but I really thank you on the interpretation of these linkages. So maybe I can just move to Victor's question, which I really
sure.
I think this is a very nice comment. I will just take it on board and then try to understand, what could happen if I could make, especially, factor income that is sent abroad. I can also change those assumptions and see what we can do. There is also another question by Debadrita. So actually, this may not be feasible due to data challenge. Yeah, so I think that is true.
So she's wondering whether your capital for mining is under the normal, let's say, capital, or it has a specific endowment for mining.
So it has no specific endowment for mining, it's just capital. So I think that is also one of the probably way is to separate this endowment. I think that could be something I can also try to work on. So thank you very much for the comment.
Christian, I also, if there is no other question, I don't see any raised hands. I just take the chance to make a question myself. I was wondering, which is your strategy in terms of the simulation? So I understand, well, there is also a bit of literature on this, this be called like latent sector. So you can create a very small sector at the beginning in your sum, and then maybe try to make it bigger, like just with injection of capital or something like this. I don't know whether your idea was something similar. And on top of, how do you think this should be funded? So would you expect that is something which comes from, as you know, more or less as Victor was asking, is something you would expect it to come from the government, from private investments, from rest of the world, FDI? How do you think this will be, you know, the source of the funding?
Yeah, thank you very much, Emanuele. This is indeed a very interesting question. I've seen the latent sector discussion. I was also thinking to do that as probably a more robust analysis. What I thought as a shortcut, especially because I did not have time to finalize the sum and run the regression and the simulations until the conference. So I took a shortcut of just shocking the input coefficient. But moving forward, I think we can develop a new sector and try to modify the sum so that we can make it larger. And the funding discussion is very, very important because for the time being, DRC government is planning to develop special economic zones to basically manufacture those electric batteries. And there is a huge discussion on basically the source of funding. So there are some companies from, I think, Australia, but also China, which are basically trying to develop the zones. So moving forward, I think the discussion on the funding, especially in the dynamic model, will be very interesting. So I take also your comment on board, and we try to discuss which combination of the source of funding will be much more optimal for the development of the sector. So thank you very much for raising those questions.
Great, thanks. So Raouf, please, if you want to raise your question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And I thank Christian for this excellent presentation. I have just a comment, as was said by Victor in some way, Roberto, that exists other approach. I think more ad hoc for this type of topics. For instance, the output input would use in some way. But just to find another way, original way to model the supply side of labor market and productivity, for example, or in general the supply in the model, in the output input approach, in what we know about Leontief method. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raouf. Yeah, this is also indeed very important. Yes, I agree with that. So basically we can, especially following what Emanuele said, so if we develop this latent sector, we can also shock the productivity there and then see how it can expand. So thank you very much for raising this other alternative. I'm very grateful for that.
Okay. Well, I think you have a fair share of reaction from the audience. If yeah, well, I guess feel free also to stay in contact now if you need anything else on this. I think we can now move forward to the next presenter. So. Raouf, I think if you want to start sharing your screen. Yeah, so the next presentation will be about assessing the socioeconomic impact of income inequality in Morocco using CGE for Morocco. So it will be delivered by Radouane Raouf, who is working at Mohammed V University in Morocco, Rabat.
Yes, you can share.
Sure. So we can wait while you are trying to share your screen. All right, yeah, now we can see it. So same rules. You'll have 20 minutes for a presentation. We'll get the signal when you get to 18 minutes, and then we will have around 10 minutes for discussion after your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ferrari. I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to the GTAP Committee Program and the Economic Commission for Africa, and in particular, the African Trade Policy Center for this, for their support. First of all, I would like to emphasize here that this work is done as part of the doctoral thesis under my supervision and led by Mr. Zakaria Shtuki, who did most part of work. Is now with us and is a fresh PhD in economics. Therefore, I will introduce the presentation. I mean, I will talk about the question of research and the context, national and international context of the question. Then Zakaria will continue and addressing the methodology, data, results, and the discussion. The main idea of this work is to show in ex-ante approach what will be the impact of an increase or reduction of inequalities on growth, on social aspects, on a couple of macroeconomic variables for the case of Morocco. The initial idea, you can skip for the next slide, Zakaria, please. I say that the initial idea of this work is to show in ex-ante approach come from or justified in the work come from almost two kinds of debates and controversy among economists, but also about stylized facts related to inequality in and inter countries. The first debate concerns what seems to be an irresistible explosion of inequality throughout the world, and in particular in developing countries. Inequality obviously have many repercussions on social order, stability, and traits and social cohesion. In this point, the stakes are very high in developing countries like Morocco, which is a sensitive issue. The second debate or concern concerns the impact of inequality on growth potential. You know that there's a great controversy about this, which we could be negative from some economists like Stiglitz, Piketty, Dayton. We can add many others, says, or mixed or even positive by other economists in line with Kaldor analysis. Actually, it is a very old subject. It goes back at least at the work of classical economists of the 18th or 19th century. It's a topic on which the mainstream economists are interested. I guess that you certainly followed and heard about the work of Zuckman and Sayes in 2020 in USA and about their book, The Triumph of Injustice, and other many interesting works like The Great Escape, Health, Wealth, and the Origin of Inequality, published in 2013 by Sir Angus Deaton, Nobel Prize laureate. So on the economic side, the controversy over the impact of inequality on growth encourages and promotes us to test this relationship for the case of Morocco. Therefore, we have tried to implement scenarios using the budgetary and fiscal policies to simulate an increase or reduction in inequality between different groups of households. Zakaria will continue and tell us more details about this question. So I will stop here and thank you. Zakaria will talk about the methodology, about the results and the discussion. So over to you, Zakaria, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raouf. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. So before going to the methodology section, we're gonna just talk a little bit about the aim of our study. So what we try to accomplish in our study is try to understand the impact of income inequality related to the household, which is the social structure, and the way that this social structure or this income inequality impact the whole system, like it's shown in this figure of the circulation of real and monetary flows in the economy. So we believe that there is mainly three types of externalities. The first one is the externality number 8, which is related to the production factor market. It means that the disparity in income inequality will surely create a disparity in the supply of factor markets, factor of production, which is labor and capital. And also, we believe that there is two other main externalities. The second one is related to the environment. We believe that there is an impact of inequality, which is not only economic, but also social in the environment, which will harm the profitability of the companies, the firms, due to the lack of the demand or the vulnerability of this demand. And the third one is related to the externality that concern the public policies or the budget of the government, because when there is an issue, a social issue, it's the government should address the issue with the social measure that will finance with budget, which surely will reduce the budget share that will be addressed to public to economic revival or other public investment. So how to express this income effects of income inequality in the ECG model? So we choose two types of determinants. The economic determinants that are represented with the output and growth, labor market, financial market, and trade openness, with a lot of variables that represent these elements. And the social determinants is represented by the well-being, education, and health, that are represented for the well-being, like the household consumption of basic commodity for the poor and rural household, and the transfer intended to the poor and rural household. And for the education and health, we believe that the access of poor household to the education, health, and other public and private service will express the harm that inequality can engender in the model. So in the methodology section, we specify that our model is a national and statistics CGE model developed, built on the model that proposed by PEP11 and calibrated on the Moroccan SAM of 2016. This social accounting matrix is distributed as follows. There is 19 branch consolidated into 3 main sectors. The primary one is related to the agriculture and fishing. Secondary sector is related to the industry and manufacturing, and the tertiary sector is related to the private and the public services that remain from the other sectors. So we have 2 main factors of production. We limited to the labor and capital, and 7 agents, economic agents, which is a single government, single firms, and a single agent represented the rest of the world, and 4 type of households that we're gonna see onward on this presentation. So we include 3 additional accounts to represent the taxes. The main account is the direct taxes, because this is the way that we will implement our shock to increase and decrease the income on the household model. So for the methodology, the numerator used is the consumer prices. We also apply a closure conform to the classical condition, which is investment equal saving. And we have other closure applied, like the external closure on the fixation on the exchange rate and the international price of import and export. And the closure related to the public closure, which specify that public expenditures and all taxes are constant. For the implementation of the shock, we know that we, in our study, that we try to generate a gap between the poor household and the rich household. And to do that, we try to use 2 types of instruments of policy. The first one is the fiscal policy. As I already told, it was an applying of direct taxation and on each represented household to create a gap between those poor and non-poor household income. The second policy is the mixed policy that include the first one and another budgetary policy related to adding an increase of 20% of public expenditure to our tax policy that will reduce the effect of the increase of the government due to the newly generated tax revenue. So now we present the social hierarchy of the household. As I already said, there is 4 types of household listed from the poor to the rich. We have the poor one is on the left is the rural poor household, and the richest is the urban non-poor household. So the way to implement the shock and to assess the income inequality, we try to apply the simulation as we already specified, and after that calculate the inequality level due by the Gini index as shown in the formula. So we take the share by type of income. The 4 type of income is the first one is the overall income household, the income of labor, the income of capital.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, Zakaria, there's something with your mic going on.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Just one moment, please. So, as I already said, this is the social hierarchy of household and the measuring income. The whole of the 4 representative household is presented there, from the poorest to the richest. So we have the RPH on the right, which is the poor household, and the UNPH, which is the urban non-poor household, which is the richest one. So how we calculate or assess the inequality between these 4 households, we try to just implement the shock, as I already said, put an overtaxation. Like if we want to increase inequality, we put an overtaxation in the poor household, and we decrease the level of revenue by decreasing the taxation on the rich household, then creating a gap between these 2 groups and calculating this gap due to Gini. According to Gini index, the formula is right here. So we use each type of household specified. We have the labor household, labor income, labor capital, and the capital income and the transfer income, and the overall household income. And we use also the proportion of each household head count, which is in line with the HCB data for the 2016. So mainly there is this is the result of the implementation on the shock on the inequality in the model. As we already said, the first simulation is the simulation that intend to increase the inequality. So when we implement the fiscal strategy, we have an increase of 0.15 of income inequality. And the opposite of this strategy is the simulation number 2, which decrease on the same amount. For the third and fourth strategy, it concerns the mixed policy that you already explained, which is just the first strategy, fiscal strategy, the direct taxation of income, and include an increase of 20% of public expenditure. So we see that those strategies decrease the inequality by minus 1.3 for SIM3, which is representative, is the same as SIM1, and minus 1.62 for the SIM4. So in the key findings is just the same result as I already explained. We have now the impact of this inequality on the consumption, saving, and transfer of the agents, especially the household agents. So we see that the increase of inequality, which is SIM1, represented in the orange, decrease in overall income for all the agents, even the firms, the companies. We see also that for the household consumption, there is a decrease for minus 0.24 due to the increase of inequality. But we observe that the household saving is less sensitive to these changes in the level of inequality, especially for the urban poor household, which increase in this situation. For the variation of the transfer, we believe that the increase of inequality decrease the overall mutuality of transfer between agents. So it's all in orange, in minus proportion. For the aggregate economic demand, we show that the increase of inequality had reduced the demand for factor related to primary and tertiary sectors, which may restrict job creation. That means that reduce the labor supply. So for the variation of the demand product, the overall consumption decreased to minus 0.4%, which is twice the variation of the household consumption, as I already said. And the consumption of the social and service such as education and health, as well as the agricultural products, decline with the increase of inequality despite the application of budgetary and stimulus policy. Like we see in SIM3, there is a decrease in the service, administrative service, and education and health services, and due to the increase in inequality and the increase of public expenditure. For the economic supply, we believe that the increase of inequality has a negative effect on the production. Like we see in the GDP on base, there is a decrease of minus 0.26%. The GDP on market prices also, there is a negative impact. For the value added, sectorial value added, there is a negative impact on the primary sector, which include agriculture and fishing. There is a positive effect on the industries, which is the secondary sector, and almost a neutral effect on the remainder service outside of public services. We also in the variation in value added due to the increase of inequality, the same one. We believe that construction value added increases more inequality and rises when inequality rises than when it decreases, like when we see here.
We have 2 minutes to go, Zakaria. Okay.
So in conclusion, this is the main result of our simulation, first simulation, which try to represent the increase of inequality by 1% of household income. As we see, there is negative impact in the economic determinants, like for the output and growth, we see that there is a negative impact on GDP, agriculture and fishing value added. There is a positive impact or effect on industries and then the second sector, which means industry value added. And there is also a positive impact in the investment rate, but its inequality in the model shows that it generates less employment and less wage rate and less return on capital. Also, it lessened the trade openness with the negative impact in exportation and importation. For the social determinants, we see that in the education and the health, all the indicators are in red. So that means that inequality generates less access of poor people to health and education and other services, social services. Also, in terms of well-being, we see that the household final consumption on GDP is extremely negative and extremely affected by inequality. But we see that poor people, especially in urban area, have a weak positive impact access to food due to the value added generated in the industry, the industrial branches related to elementary industry and tabagism. So in conclusion, we believe that ensuring equity in income distribution is essential for sustainable economic development and true social inclusion. And by extension, the increase of 1% of income inequality affect the GDP by minus 1.7 on basic prices and minus 1.6 on market prices. We specify as a limit that this result is limited to the Moroccan context. So our model and also our modeling approach do not include the effects of monetary and non-market factors. And also in the next following step, we would like to work and improve our study by incorporating a microsimulation approach and dynamics to capture the long-term trends and interactions. And also assess the effect of program of reduction, disparity reduction, such as the universal allowance, lifetime wages, and the sense approach. So I would thank you for your attention and for your next commentary and suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zakaria. Thank you very much, Radouane. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm happy to open the floor in case anyone has any question. Otherwise, I'm also happy to break the ice. Yeah, there's Michael asked if you can say something more about the microsimulation approach. The microsimulation approach you mentioned in your last slide. Can you? I don't know. Okay, please.
Yeah. Yes, Zakaria mentioned the microsimulation as a new etap for this work. Is for perspective of this work to have more analysis on households in group, in intra-group. So we need a microsimulation approach. We don't use microsimulation here, but it's we think that's a good way to improve this work. I don't know if Zakaria would add something else. Thank you.
Yes, please, Mr. Raouf. I just want to say that this work is only in early stages. So we try to capture many factors because we have in a whole literature reviews about this issue. So we try to include all these factors like the increase of criminality, of the lack of trust, and other elements like that. We try to modelize this in the model CGE model, but for now we just specify the already proposed model by PEP, and we fixed all factors that can create a problem in modeling this issue, to just focus on the effect of inequality or the increase and decrease of income of each household on the overall economy. So onward, we were gonna try to improve this study and present the more valuable results from it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have also a couple of comments also myself while waiting if someone else wants to join the discussion. The first one is related to the tool you're using. Well, I have to admit I don't know the Moroccan economy that well, but I'm wondering whether the direct taxation is the perfect instrument to this for doing this. I guess if you have a lot of informalities and I don't know how much is the rate of payments of direct taxation in the economy. So maybe you might have other instruments you want to look at. So probably you also mentioned some of them like transfers to households or for issues like this that might also cap the reality of the economy better. I don't know. This is, as I said, I'm not an expert of the economy. Just a reflection. And the other one was when you present the result, it was my attention was caught by the increase in the saving rate, the overall saving rate you were showing in the economy. I'm wondering whether that one is due to the government closure rules you adopted, and because you said you're basically fixing the expenditures of the government, and you are sort of I don't know whether you are. I mean, whether the simulation you are doing are reducing the expenditures of the government and increasing their savings. I'm not sure if I got it correctly or not. Maybe I'm totally wrong here. But that results was a little bit striking to me. Also because if I'm afraid if you move into dynamics, you will have positive effects in terms of growth because you increase investment, increase saving, increase investments, and positive effects on growth. So someone might tell that inequality is good, which I have the impression it's not your policy message, you know.
Just to explain, I want just to be in total accordance with what you said, because when we try to implement the shock by taxation, direct taxation, there is an augmentation or there is an increase in the public budget revenue, because there is an over taxation in each, and that implies an increase also in the investment, public investment, which affect the overall investment. That's why we have a positive effect on that. But this is the reason that we choose two types of instrument. The first one was only the fiscal taxation to try to see how the gap interacts with the model. But the second one, we introduce an augmentation with public expenditure, the consumption of public, to decrease the budget of the government and also decrease the effect of the saving. So in the other result of the simulation, we have this result that decreases. It doesn't have the same impact. But in the first one, the same one that we chooses, we have this problem because we cannot generate an increase, decrease, and the income without doing an implementation of shock. So the instrument that we chose had this problem. But perhaps if we do just transfer, there's another problem with transfer because we need to have another agent, fifth agent that is not a household, but just I don't know, perhaps organism that will get the supply of income to generate that. But for now, we choose to put that by fiscal policy, because it's not the easy way, but the practical way. Or perhaps in the future work, we're gonna address this issue and try to reduce the effect of our shock implementation on the public income, the government income, to reduce that. So
yeah, maybe you can play with closure rule, I guess. No, you can fix the saving amount of the government, so that will automatically somehow move the expenditure. Well, I don't know. Well, there are many ways now if you want, but no. So that's okay for me. Yeah, but that answer my point.
Yeah, I can add just very quickly. I'm agree with your remarks about informality in Morocco. That's a great issue. So to mitigate inequality, certainly the government should use transfer also, and to reduce the magnitude of informality. About the problem of saving, I think that it depends more on the framework, which is based on neoclassical model. Why the mainstream economists try to explain that inequality sometimes is good for growth, because when inequality goes up, the saving is more important, which we help us to finance investment in general. That I think that the framework, the neoclassical model and the hypothesis go to this type of results. And like what you say, the closure rules of expenditure, government's expenditure also play a big role in this result. Yes, we are aware about that. We have to check many other type or strategy of closures. Thank you.
All right. So unless there are anybody else that want to join the discussion, I think we can slowly move into the next presentation. Also, allow me to send you a virtual round of applause that also extended to Christian before. I forgot. So thank you, Radouane. Thank you, Zakaria, for the very interesting presentation. And I think we can now move to our third presenter of the day. So that would be sorry, this was gonna make me Abdelhamid Nassour. And it will tell us about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreements, and in particular the CGE model to assess the effect on LDCs in the particular case of Chad. I believe Abdelhamid is working directly for the Chad government as a counselor. So yeah, I think we have heard a lot about the African trade agreements in these 3 days. And I'm sure that we will hear additional interesting insight on the topic. It's very high in the list of the GTAP community, apparently. So if you can start sharing the screen in case you have your presentation, and I would say with the same rules as before, you have the floor for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ferrari, Chairman. Thank you, Assistant. Thank you for the occasion. I apologize for my English, not very good. English not good at all. Thank you. So I'm going to present my paper about a CGE model to assess the effects of the AfCFTA in the economic of the least developed countries of Africa. The case of Chad is considered as a least developed countries in Africa. So my presentation will be like this: introduction, characteristics of the Chadian economy, methodology and data, model specification and data, model accounting framework, the social accounting matrix, simulation and comments on the results. So have a simulation scenario, discussion of simulation result, and then conclusion. So the purpose of the study focused on the analysis of effects of implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) on Chadian economy, and the Chad classified among the least developed countries. A recursive dynamic computer general equilibrium model is used, adapted from the PEP model of Decalwe and al. 2013, was used to model the Chadian economy. The accounting basis of the model is the sum of Chad developed by also Decalwe in 2008. This sum, which has 5 economic agents, 19 branches, and 19 products, has been adapted to our model with a breakdown of capital into public capital and private capital, then a breakdown of work, informal work and informal work, to see which one is very impacted by the AfCFTA. Here we can see the evolution of the trade balance as a percentage of GDP, we took from since 1960 to 2018. As you can see, between 2001 and 2003, there is a huge gap in terms of balance according to the importation of important material for exploitation of oil. I want to share with you that Chad began producing oil since 2004. So you can see here a little constant of the balance in terms of percentage of GDP. So that's according to the production of the oil. Before 2001, you see that the balance is negative until 2003. The curve of the evolution of unemployment, I want to share with you the evolution of unemployment. The fact is that between 2010 to 2017, we see that a huge evolution, and since 2013, you see that unemployment passed from 5 to 26. That is a big, very big evolution of unemployment. We are going together to explain how this is impacted by the Chadian economy. According to the methodology and the data, as I said earlier, in this study, the basic dynamic AfCFTA model developed by Dekalwi and al. 2013 is used, integrating additional characteristics specific to the study carried out. The labor market is disaggregated into formal and informal work. A salary curve is also introduced in this model. The model is dynamic recursive for assessing the effect of laborization over several years and the analysis of structural changes over time. It is applied to a country considered less advanced. As I said earlier, it is composed of 5 categories of institutions. We have households, firm, government, rest of world, Africa, because we have 2 rest of world, Africa and the world outside Africa. The model takes into account 2 types of capital factors. We have private capital and public capital, 19 branch of activities and 19 products or services. A simulation and comment on the result. The simulation relates to a gradual liberalization. There is a schedule of liberalization in 13 years. We'll see that on the next slide. Liberalization of product trades with African countries over a period of 10 years. We used here in this study only 10 years and not 13 years like programmed in this schedule. This implies a gradual evolution of customs duties on at least 80% of goods traded between the countries of the African continent. With regard to sensitive products, liberalization is only effective from the 6th year of the implementation of AfCFTA, and thus extends until the 3rd year. On the other hand, a horizon of 10 years is set for this study, which will not make it possible to reach the last 3 years of liberalization. The reduction rates are calculated on the basis of the dismantling practice table adopted during the negotiation. Said the subject of this study, being considered as less advanced country, belong to the category which will totally liberalize in 10 years. All products considered non-sensitive, and in 13 years, sensitive products into reduction for non-reduction for excluded product. So we will see the schedule. So can you see you have for non-sensitive products, for sensitive products, and for exclusive products. Chad is considered as least developed country, so for non-sensitive products, Chad has total liberalization in 10 years and in 17 years for sensitive products, and no reduction for excluded products. So in the result of simulation, we can see that there is a huge change in terms of import and export. From the 6th year of liberalization until the 7th, there is a little bit decrease, but after that, you see that from the 5th year, a huge evolution, positive evolution of imports, and also a huge positive evolution in terms of exports. In terms of price change, you can see that from the 5th years of liberalization, household price decreased considerably, and it is the same for average price. And we see that from the 5th years of liberalization, there is a decrease of price on market. Average household demand, however, average household demand is increasing from the 6th or 7th year of liberalization. That is due to the liberalization with a large products which are imported from the other countries of Africa. In terms of change in added value, you can see here that change in added value depends on sectors. That there are sectors, we see that later there are sectors that added value is increasing with liberalization, and other that change in value are decreasing with the AfCFTA. According to the job demand, we have two forms of job, informal job and informal job. So in terms of demand of job, you see that formal job is increasing from the first years of liberalization and then decreasing until the 7th year. It is non-constant, but in terms of informal job, you see that there is an increase and constant increase in terms of job demand. According to the evolution of the wage rate, there is evolution. There is a decrease from the 5th year for the both formal and informal wage rate, and after that we see that increase and then decrease like this. It's not constant in terms of evolution. Evolution of government incomes, that's clear. Yet, from the 5th year of liberalization, government lose in terms of incomes, lose considerably incomes. You see that that is according to the deletion of taxes. So that's why government is losing a lot of incomes with liberalization. GDP evolution, you see that the GDP growth positively from the 5th year of liberalization, and after 2 years, the GDP decrease until the 8th year of liberalization, and then grow a little bit until the 9th year of liberalization. So in terms of conclusion, we can say that as the factor market is affected by liberalization, there has been a fluctuation in the demand for formal as well as informal labor. However, there is a correlation between the added value and the demand for labor in the same sector of activity. When the sector records an increase in added value, the demand the demand for labor in this sector increases and vice versa. Overall, the labor market recorded an increase over the previous studies. As a result, within the Chadian labor market, informal work is growing more than formal work and therefore likely to create more jobs. So government is quite open to structure the informal economy and adjust taxes or even introduce new taxes following the drop in of business sectors to produce positive growth. Ultimately, the lesson of economic policy is that the implementation of AfCFTA implies targeted investment in the sectors of the economy in order to take advantage of comparative advantage, even if this targeted investment will lead to job losses in certain sectors that are not very competitive in the African market, such as the construction and non-food industry sectors. Other sectors are promising, can create jobs and create growth. So Chadian economy is very it's not very developed in terms of industry. So more than 70% of incomes comes from oil production. So that's why government has to cut upon the structure to structure the informal economy and adjust tax. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Assistant. Thank you for following me.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As I imagined at the beginning, that was very interesting. Also to hear about the specific case of Chad. I see already a question in the chat. Maybe Roberto, if you want to raise it directly.
Yeah. Just a side comment. So I'm not an expert of African economies, but from papers I read, from presentation I saw, I understand that one of the main reasons why intra-African trade is so limited is not really because of tariffs, but rather because of a number of barriers to trade, ranging from non-trade barriers to trade frictions like high trade and transportation costs. So I just a suggestion to make your results more interesting, more valuable from policy perspective. Okay, I see Raouf that is not agreeing with me. That's okay, but nonetheless, it would be nice to contrast the possible effects of trade liberalization versus productivity gain in trade. I mean, more efficient trades. What's the difference in terms of overall magnitude, but also in terms of characteristics? Because, for example, at the sectoral level, you may have different impacts. So yeah, so this is simply, yes, I would be curious to see a kind of comparison of this kind. I wonder if you could consider for future work.
So if well, I guess you and Raouf, you did agree more than it. You do agree more than it looks like, because yeah, you both say, you know, that NTB are very high and might be very relevant in this study. So if you, Nassour, if you want to say something on this comment.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrari. Thank you very much, Mr. Rosen, for your comment. I think African trade is very young. I mean, in terms of liberalization, AfCFTA has been created has been created in 2020 officially. I mean, so I think you're right when you say it'd be nice to make comparison between productivity gain and I think you're right. So I take your advice, your comment, and I thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a small question. I want to understand the impact on formal and informal labor. You mentioned that the demand of informal labor is increasing very faster. So basically, that could be something, we can look at more carefully, but I just want to learn from your model. Is there any specific modeling, especially in terms of wage between formal and informal, or you just break down labor by different groups?
Thank you, Mr. Otchia. I think we have two kind of job, formal and informal job. We just took this two kind of job. We divide. We took the data on job according to the child economy, and we have just used this to see how AfCFTA will impact the both type of job. Now we see that informal job in Chad, like in African countries, is very developed informal job, and that could be very interesting for a government to see how AfCFTA can impact this or the other one type of job to take to make policies. We see that that informal sectors in Africa can take almost 15 or 60% of job. So government can formalize this sector and benefit from taxes. So in our model, we just wanted to see a little bit if formal or informal jobs are how can this sector will be interesting in terms of legalization.
Thank you. Christian, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. So Victor, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nassour. Very interesting presentation. I think, yeah, we really need more applications of at this country level, especially for LDC cases. Looking at the last graph you showed, I think one of the last ones with the GDP, and it showed that there were some fluctuations there. So it was going from a positive, yes, in the first 2 years you had a positive effect, then you had the negative, and then going back. And I was wondering, on one side, in one side, it doesn't feel like we're reaching something close to a steady state, and whether you considered extending the analysis to more years. Also, I think it's important for the LDCs where you have an extended liberalization schedule to 13 years. And second, I was wondering if you had a look to try to explain why is this fluctuation, because, well, in the studies we've seen so far, because you have a gradual elimination of tariffs, you have more smoother lines, so you generally have either a positive GDP increase, but that's, it's a gradual increase or a decrease. But in your case, it's a bit different from what we've seen in other studies.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question, your interesting question. I think the GDP evolution depends on on the capacity of Chad to competitive with other countries. You see that from the first year of liberalization, Chadian economy can take profit from the liberation, but after, when the economy, the industrial sector cannot be competitive in the African market, I think that's why that is the reason why we can see that there is a huge decrease of GDP. So as I said earlier, Chad industry is not very important. This sector cannot be competitive with other countries like Nigeria or Congo, some countries who has a huge industry sector. So I think that's the reason why GDP evolution is not constant. I think I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nassour. I've also questioned myself, and I was reading your modeling strategies. I was wondering, while you were mentioning the liberalization on the tariff side, but I was wondering whether you were also somehow looking at the export side of Chad, because I guess there will be also some advantages, from Chad point of view to be part of the African trade agreements, so that there will be some expansion also in terms of intra-African exports, maybe some trade diversion, but hopefully also some trade creation within African partners.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrari. I think the side of tariff, I think in terms of liberalization, African, as I said earlier, is very, I mean that's the first experience for African market in terms of liberalization. There is a sub-regional trade area, Central Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and that is the first step for the liberation for many years. But now, in terms of tariff, I think we have to take this in consideration. I thank you for your remark, and I think that's what I can say now.
Yeah, thank you. Victor, your hand is still raised. I guess if you have another question, it was the previous one.
Sorry, no.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no additional questions, I'll extend a round of applause to you too, Mr. Nassour, and thank you again for this interesting presentation. We can I think now move to our last presenter. So if you can please stop sharing your screen, and we can move to, as I said, to our last presenters, Michiel van Dijk from the Wageningen Economic Research, the research of the Wageningen Economic Research, and they will present today as a paper on the subnational projection of income and poverty for Ethiopia using a dynamic spatial microsimulation approach. Okay, so I think, well, you know already the rules of the game, Michiel. The floor is yours, and you can start sharing your presentation with us.
Thank you, Ferrari. I want to thank everybody.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and your answer. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Do you see my presentation?
Sure.
Good. So thanks everybody for hanging around. the last one in this session. As Emanuele said, my name is Michiel van Dijk. I'm affiliated with Wageningen Economic Research, which is part of Wageningen University and Research. My talk of today is a joint effort. So it's a collaboration with 3 of my colleagues, Marijke, Thijs, and Jason. And it deals with sort of describing, illustrating an approach which involves microsimulation and linkages with the CGE model. And I also raised this question before to, I think, the second presenters about the microsimulation, because I was quite triggered, of course, by their remark. See if I can change the slide. Yeah. Yes, an introduction. I think it's quite clear now that many countries are developing long-term strategies, either related to the SDGs or maybe climate, or also transitioning to sustainable food systems. To the right, you see some examples. I think as part of the UN Food System Summit, several countries, among others Bangladesh, are developing this national food system pathway. On the other end, of course, these NDCs, which are the national climate plans that almost every country now is developing. And actually, as Wageningen Economic Research, we're quite involved in the one CGIAR framework. And we're often approached now by these countries and their donors to support the development of these plans, and particularly with a foresight analysis or a scenario analysis. And this is not so easy, because I think the gold standard for doing this ex ante policy assessments are some simulation models combined with scenario analysis. And I think the IPCC reports are a clear example of this, but also the recent IPBES reports, where they develop biodiversity scenarios. But the problem is these simulations, and we do this as well, we have an in-house GTAP model, are mainly done with these large global macroeconomic simulation models, who provide some information at country level, but it's quite difficult, I would say, to derive detailed results. And we notice that stakeholders and local policymakers, they want to have information about differences in households or maybe differences in regions. And of course, one option is using a national CGE model. We've seen various illustrations in this session, but we took a slightly different route because we want to keep the linkages with the global sort of shocks and developments. So we started out to develop a methodology that addresses household heterogeneity and also provides some spatial detail when doing simulations. And as I said, that was the aim of this project, to develop a modeling approach that takes into account global, national, and local drivers of income, to simulate income distribution and poverty at the subnational scale. And I think with this methodology, we hope to answer some questions like which districts in the country, in this case Ethiopia, are most likely to achieve some of the SDGs. In this particular project, we're focusing on income changes and income projections. So which districts are able to achieve SDG 1 and maybe SDG 10, which deals with inequality. But also what's the impact of decreasing economic growth caused by COVID-19 and now maybe even with the Ukraine conflict on the spatial distribution of poverty. And I guess, if you can create maps, you can also combine them with all kinds of results from biophysical models, and maybe overlay them and identify hotspots in terms of climate, but also in terms of poverty. So as a background, we're drawing very heavily on 2 streams of literature, which are a bit related. One is the spatial microsimulation literature. I was actually not aware about this literature before I started the project. It deals very much with the assessment of local policies at a very local level. It involves reweighting, resampling surveys and combining it with census data. Normally in this exercise, and I will tell a bit more later on, it's a static exercise, although there are dynamic applications. As I said, they're using survey information and population census. The scale is often very small, local. So there's city level analysis or maybe provincial level analysis. And actually this type of work I noticed is mainly practiced by national statistical agencies, but also sometimes universities. And they develop models called Sim Britain, Sim Athens, and so on. And that already illustrates a bit the scale of these models. And I also listed a couple of references. Then there is another, I guess, more familiar set of literature to the GTAP community, which is the macro poverty assessment literature. So I think the objective here is to analyze the impact of large macroeconomic shocks on global poverty. The method is a bit related. So it's also the adjustment or reweighting of household surveys, but informed by macroeconomic projections, simulation. The time horizon is dynamic. It's forward-looking. The data are mainly nationally representative household surveys, LSMS style. Scale is global. And I think the actors in this are almost predominantly the World Bank and IFPRI. And they have developed models, which some of you might know, which one is the linkage model coupled with GIT, which is a micro simulation model. And I think another one is the one by IFPRI, the Miragro-DEP model coupled with Bovana, which is also a micro simulation model. So what we did, we basically took bits and pieces of both types of literature. We take the spatial reweighting algorithms from the spatial microsimulation approach. We combine household survey information with population census data. And we took sort of the macro-micro linkages and the scenario approach from this micro-macro global literature. And we developed, I mean, it's still in development, a model which we give it a name. We refer to as SIT, the Spatial Simulation of Income Distribution Model. So this is the framework. It actually involves a couple of steps. I'll take you through it. I mean, I have to be brief necessarily, but hopefully you'll grasp the big picture. And of course, there's room to ask questions. So I think the input data is mainly this, what they call shared socioeconomic pathway database. So the SSPs in short are the global scenarios that are used by the IPCC and the big climate projections and climate simulations. And they are available for nearly every country, up to 2100 even. And then they constitute national population GDP projections. But they also have gridded population urbanization projections. We ourselves created complementary occupation projections. So how will the distribution of high-skilled and low-skilled workers change over time in different scenarios? And finally, we also draw on gridded population data. And for this particular exercise, we use the Ethiopia Socio-Economic Survey, which is a World Bank supported LSMS ISA survey. And it has data on almost 7,500 households. Then the first step, I would say, in our exercise is developing subnational projections. So this is an example of North Shewa. It's actually just a random district I picked out of the 60 districts in Ethiopia. And it's very similar to the national projections, but by combining all kinds of information, we create these subnational projections for key drivers of income and poverty. So this involves urbanization, occupation change, the demographic distribution, and also number of households. And here you can see the difference. As a short note, SSP1 is a sustainable scenario. So it's high growth, high technological change, and movement towards sustainability. SSP2 is business as usual, and SSP3 is a low growth, fragmented economy scenario. And you see, for instance, SSP1, urban population is going up a lot in this district, while rural population is going down. And the same patterns emerge for the other main drivers. So the next step is the actual spatial microsimulation. So the essence of spatial microsimulation is that you combine geographically aggregated data, which is representative for a small district, so North Shewa, with household survey data. So in this case, the LSMS for Ethiopia. And then actually you run an algorithm, and in spatial microsimulation, it's referred to as iterative proportional fitting. But I think many of you are familiar with RAS which is a way to rebalance data, matrix data, which is also used in CGE frameworks. And actually, these algorithms are very, very similar. And what you get is as a representative data set at a subnational level. And with this, you can derive poverty estimates or even food consumption estimates, because you have the whole distribution within a subnational region. So then, of course, if we have assess the impact of the demographic structure in a subnational region, we still need to update the wages, because over time wages also change, maybe because of structural change, and there's a lot of demand for high-skilled workers and less for low-skilled workers. In agriculture, of course, the wages change. So for this, we use our in-house CGE model. It's a GTAP-based model with all kinds of extensions. And actually, the standard GTAP model only has 2 types of occupations, I think, low-skilled and high-skilled. But we extended it with new data into 5 types of occupations, which are in line with the ILO standards occupation list. It involves, I think, labor in agriculture, clerks, service workers, high engineers, and professionals. And finally, yeah, we use this data to shock the labor supply in the model, like you normally would do with GDP and population, and then endogenously we derive changes in wages under different scenarios for each of the 5 occupations. Then, if we have this, of course, we need to update the wages for all the households over time. So this was a bit complicated, because household surveys, particularly for Ethiopia, they are very poor on the income side, but I would say quite detailed on the expenditure side. But expenditure is only given for the total household. So we use a simple regression approach to sort of impute the wages by regressing total household income on sort of what the occupation is of each family member. And we do this separately for the urban and rural households. So you see this is sort of imputed wage, I would say. And finally, we update all the wages using the magnet projections. And then as a final step, yeah, the microsimulation and the updated wages are combined. And that generates income distribution projections and maps and so on, in this case for Ethiopia. So just show you some figures to illustrate our approach. So what you see here is again for North Shiwa, this targeted district. You see 3 sort of distributions of the household income. And also the dashed line is the national poverty line, Ethiopia. And yeah, the diagrams of this moving image shows how the distribution of income changes over time, and also how the poverty headcount is changing over time. So in SSP1, which is at high growth, increase in wages and so on, more people moving to high-skilled jobs, more people moving to the city. Actually, the distribution is moving to the right, and the poverty headcount is decreasing. So people getting richer, sort of, on average. In SSP2, nothing much is happening. So basically, things are canceling out. And in SSP3, you see the opposite as in SSP1. There's not much structural change in the economy. Agriculture sector is still very big. Wages are even decreasing, I think, relatively. And the poverty headcount is increasing sharply. Well, this you can do then for each of the districts. In this case, there's 60 administrative level, I think 1 regions or 2 in Ethiopia. So we did this for all the regions. And so you can produce this kind of maps, which show the change of income distribution, in this case, poverty headcount, over time for each of the regions and also across different scenarios. So what this map shows is that in 2018, the average poverty headcount, which is in line with national statistics, was around 30-40%, with variations in the different regions. And then in SSP1, which is in the high growth scenario, things become greener. In this case, green is also good. So poverty headcount is decreasing. And in SSP3, things are moving to the red color. That means that the poverty headcount is increasing, even up to, I think, 50, 60%, 70 even, for some of the regions. So you see these clear patterns emerging, which are, I mean, there's patterns spatially, which still have to investigate, but also between scenarios, lots of things are happening. Well, I guess on a final illustration, so as we also do the analysis by urban and rural households, even by distribution age, you can break it down. So here I simply show the difference in urban population poverty and rural population poverty. And I guess what is to be expected, that on average, urban populations are less poor than rural populations. And also, of course, this determines the pattern 250. And the diagram on the left is sort of the absolute number in poor population across the scenarios, and also divided by rural and urban population. And you also have to know that, of course, the total population assumptions also are different in SSP1. This is a low population growth scenario, and SSP3 is a high population growth scenario. Moving to my conclusions, I think we developed a sort of innovative spatial dynamic microsimulation approach, combining it with CGE modeling, which provides, I think, very, very detailed results at different levels. And hopefully this can support us and support the countries in developing their national climate strategies or SDG strategies. Of course, it's not perfect. There's still many limitations and things we have to work on. So the CGE model, it's a macro GTAP style model, as I said. So the wage projections are not spatially explicit. That means they're the same for all the districts, which is, of course, not realistic. So maybe we can change this by using different exogenous assumptions. It's also very much a top-down approach. I mean, you can imagine all kinds of feedback loops in terms of changing in wages and so on, changing consumption patterns, which will also have an impact on prices and so on. This is not taken into account. And finally, the household income change is driven by wages only. And of course, we also know that capital income is a major source of income, particularly in high income countries. And this is not taken into account because we don't have this information. There's no data on this. Finally, some future research. So as I said, we want to maybe add some assumptions on divergence or convergence, depending on the scenarios related to the wage in the different districts. We want to see if we can simulate the impact of redistributed policies, tax and subsidies, and see what the impact is on the spatial distribution of income. And finally, I think we also want to move to other indicators. So we want to combine the income projection with food consumption data, which is also available through the survey, and maybe with elasticities on how food consumption changes when household income goes up or down. And then try to produce spatially explicit and scenario explicit food security and food demand projections. And finally, I think, a lot of things are going on in our scenarios, in our model. There's demographic change, there's urbanization, change in wages. So we want to do a decomposition analysis to see which are actually the main drivers of all these things. Well, that's it for now. Hope I was still in time. And of course, I welcome questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michiel. I think we managed to keep our host totally unemployed. Nevertheless, to stop your presentation, very well done. Michiel, there is already a chat request. I don't know, Rimi, if you want to raise it directly or it's about the well, I think it's a very popular question these days. Yeah, go ahead, quick.
I know, no, I think some of it has been answered in the last couple concluding slides that you guys are still working on, like refining the scenarios and everything. But yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a concern about which SSP database is the model using? Because I know that there has been a recent update for the population scenarios in 2018, though the original one is from 2013. That was my question.
Yeah, that's completely correct. I think even within the GTAP conference this week, there was a presentation by Rob Delling, I think, who presented, I didn't listen to it, but who presented, an update. And actually, I'm participating in 2 weeks' time at the Scenarios Forum at the IASA, where they're going to, I think, present the first new SSP projection. So I use still the old ones because the new ones are not available. Right. So this is the old ones, and of course they need to be updated, and particularly now in light with COVID and Ukraine conflict, it's of course lots of things have happened globally, and there's yeah, things need to be adjusted.
Exactly.
So I mean, when they come available, we definitely would like to incorporate them in our analysis.
There's actually one for the population update, which has been. I can just share the paper like after this conference, but I think there has been one with the population update that's already like it's not available on the website, but I think they have published it as a paper with like an appendix, so I can like send across the paper if you're interested after the conference.
Yeah, that would be nice because I think it's definitely something which needs to be done. So I fully agree.
Very interesting presentation, though. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If you have the link, you can also put in the chat, I guess. Thank you. So the next question was from Victor, please.
Okay. Thanks, Michiel. Very, very nice presentation. So it's so good to see the spatial representation of CG results, be this with simulation or other methods. I was wondering, actually, I have two questions that are kind of related. The first one was, how did you handle the labor segmentation that you have in Magnet with urban-rural division in the microsimulation part? And I think, well, my second question would be, well, since you have better data, in national social accounting matrices, for instance, for Ethiopia, here at the JRC, we have a SAM that has more household groups, more labor segments in the urban-rural division. Whether you think it's also a nice opportunity to use this spatial microsimulation even within the country CG models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your question. So you raise a couple of different points. So I think one hand in Magnets, we account for this segmented agriculture and non-agricultural labor market. So people who are in agriculture and want to move out, they cannot immediately go, which means there's a wedge in wages in the end between these two sectors. We do not account in CG model for the urban and rural differences explicitly because it's not part of the SAM and the data. That's only accounted for in the microsimulation because there the household survey has this information. So the starting imputed wage or the started returns to an occupation, they differ by urban and rural population, but then how they're updated over time. So the growth rate that's coming from the CG model, that is the same for both types of households, and I think that's just difficult to incorporate urban-rural differences in a CG model, at least in a global one. I think you had a remark on using national CG models. Actually, I mean that would be very nice because I know that the national models, some of which were also illustrated in this session, they have subnational details, so they probably are able to supply or create projections at subnational level, maybe only at bigger provinces, but that's okay, on these different wages per occupation and also on the food prices, because I didn't talk about it much, but also food prices are factored in our analysis, right? Because if you want to account for changes in income, you also have to take into account the change in the prices, because with the income they buy the food. So one possibility would definitely, and I think we want to explore this in some projects, is to link this type of spatial dynamic microsimulation with the output from a national level CG model, which would give us richer, I would say, data. On the other hand, the downside is then that you lose the connection with the global. So if you want to really want to look at these, say the increase in food prices because of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, then I guess these linkages are hugely important. So then you might want to use a global CG model. But in general, I would say I see the dynamic microsimulation as an add-on, maybe a downscaling of results from a CG model. I hope this answers a bit your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Michiel. Raouf. Raouf, if you want to, your hand is raised if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Van Dijk, for this and very interesting presentation, very professional and comprehensive. You add many complexity on the standard models, which we call top-down approach with the framework, macroeconomic framework linkage to microsimulation approach. The complexity here is you add the spatial analysis, which for me it's a good idea. It's innovative, and also will be more tricky in some way to have data, to have some parameters for the model, just the macroeconomic framework, the global model for many regions in developing countries like Ethiopia. It was very, very difficult, and I thank you so much for this work. My question is, you combine many approach. What type of linkage you use for linkage to deal with the simulations, the impact or the simulation that you use the scenario in the framework, by which linkage, by which channel draw the scenario. The second question: did you take account in the modeling of the labor market supply, migration between unskills to move to skills, between rural to urban, for example, or even immigration between Ethiopia and other countries? That's, I think, all my question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Yeah, thanks. Very good questions. I think your first question, I think, is about the relation between the models, I guess, between the spatial microsimulation and the CGE, how they're linked. I think they're linked sort of in two ways. So one, we make sure that all the scenario assumptions are consistent. So the drivers in the macro model, the SSP projections, are exactly the same as in the subnational projections. So they're completely consistent. They basically add up. The subnational totals add up to the national total. And the second linkage is then the output of the CGE model, which are mainly the wages and the relative wages and the food prices and so on. They are brought into the microsimulation analysis and further processed or combined. So these are the two linkages. So it's indeed top down. So there's no feedback again from the microsimulation to the CGE model. It might be very interesting to do this, but also very complicated. I've read a bit about it, but I think it's not something we consider right now because of the complexity. We rather, make the inconsistency explicit, and then say that this is an analysis we do in this way, because I think that's the way we like to go to have practical results right now. But of course, it's not perfect. Your second question was, I forgot. You're muted, Raoul, sorry.
Yeah, the second is about if you take account the migration between skills and...
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. I would say partly, because the subnational population projections we use, which also include urbanization projections, they are based on the SSPs, and the SSPs themselves, the population projections, they do include or do account for different migration patterns across countries, and also depending on the scenario assumption. So definitely in the drivers, there is in some ways, migration is accounted for. I would argue myself that, I mean, these are global scenarios. These are global gridded population projections. I mean, they're probably not very, very detailed, right? I mean, if you really would account for migration patterns in Ethiopia, you would have to do an Ethiopia study, like how people would migrate maybe to neighboring countries or so on. So there's definitely some improvement possible if somebody would be willing in our study, as part of our study, to create more country-specific input data or input projections. But in some way, migration is accounted for, I would say, within the SSPs.
Thank you, Michael. Christian?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. A very, very interesting presentation. I learned a lot. Actually, my question was actually asked by Raouf, but let me just coming back. I was interested about migration also, especially if you use a national CGE model, then because you have the urban rural, and what happens, especially in Ethiopia, is everybody wants to move to Addis, the capital city, because you know, the huge agglomeration. So that could be well captured if you have a national standard. But I think the two questions before me ask that. I also basically wanted to ask about this top-down and bottom-up approach, because I think the price mechanism is very important, especially the wage rates and so on. So moving forward, are you interested also to see how you can endogenous the poverty line? Because in your last findings, the poverty line was fixed, right? So I just wanted to know, moving forward, can you endogenize the poverty line so that moving forward we can adjust the poverty line itself also in the model?
No, that's a very good question. Actually, yes, we have to. In this presentation, I did not, and also actually in the calculation, I did not. But the Magnet model also gives us the food price changes, food price projections. So we can construct a in line with the food basket, the changes in price and food prices, and then we could actually dynamically update the national poverty line. Or on the other hand, we could keep the poverty line the same, and then account for it in the household incomes. That's the same, right? You either move the line or you move distribution of income back to the left or to the right. So this is definitely something we have on our short list to do. I was not able to do it for this presentation, but to be consistent, yes, we have to move both the income distribution and the reference, which is the poverty line, which changes because food prices changes in the country as well. So it's a very good point, and it's on our list.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A quick question also on my side. I was wondering, because you mentioned food security and also food prices, but as far as I understood, you are moving only the wages, from the CGE to the microsim, or are you already including also the food prices, or are you planning to link also the CGE and microsim through the food price changes, which, if you want to treat food security, is probably very good addition.
Yeah, so it's a bit of follow-up on, I think, the previous question, my remarks. On the one hand, for the poverty analysis, we need the food prices, but in all the prices, I would say, but mostly is households mainly buy food in poor countries. So we need to account for the change in food prices and factor this in the poverty line. And the next step now is developing a food security indicator. And we're looking now at the prevalence of undernourishment, which is a standard FAO food security indicator, because that's also based on a fixed cutoff point, right? It's minimum energy requirement. And at the same time, you need the full distribution of the calorie consumption, which we can create. The question is how we're going to create this. For the base year, it's easy because we know the food consumption pattern per household. So we can also calculate, in many household survey, so this is done, calculate the food consumption in terms of kilocalories for each of the households. But to update this into the future, we now want to take the standard approach, which is also used in I guess, a magnet, but also in some partial equilibrium models like Globium, which is used at the IASA. And then you take food price elasticities for each food group, and then you basically multiply the change in household income, which we know now, with the elasticity to basically update their consumption pattern and account for Engel's law, and what's the other one? I forgot the name. It's another law, because we know that people, if they become richer, they move to more. Well, now maybe things are changing, but in general, they move to more meat consumption and vegetable consumption or whatever. So we should be able to simulate a potential diet change depending on the scenario again. So that's something which is a second thing higher on our list because many countries and clients are asking for it. It requires a bit more thinking, but I think we have an idea how to do it now.
Yeah, in the magnet, well, it will be for one representative household, but yeah, you have the change in the consumption pattern, no? So you would have to distribute them to different housing.
Yeah, but you want to do it through the household survey.
Yeah,
so you
sure.
want to probably disregard the magnets, maybe calibrate them, but
yeah, so yeah, find a way to to be consistent between the two.
Yeah, that's the thing. Maybe the average we can basically calibrate, and then the distribution we take from the household survey or something. But that's indeed where we are right now with thinking. So.
All right, very good. Thanks a lot. So I see also Rimi shared the database on updated population in the chat for those who might be interested in that.
Thank you.
And I think if there is no additional question, we are done. I think all the presenters got a nice contribution from the audience. I think it was a very interesting session. Thank you very much to all four presenters. Yes, I share also my round of applause with you, Michiel, in particular, but in general with all the presenters. Yeah, it was very interesting again, and that's it. I think I'll enjoy the rest of the conference and the rest of the day and also the weekend, given that we're already on Friday. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rimi, for hosting us, and see you all soon